Alrighty, here we go. Preterite versus imperfect. These are both past tenses. In English, we do have different past tenses, but we really only use primarily one. So trying to come up with different ways of describing about the past is really confusing to us because it does not exist. It's like trying to come up with a brand new color that's a primary color that doesn't use any of the other colors that we've used before. Can you try to imagine a brand new primary color? It's a really difficult process. In fact, I don't know if it's possible. Learning preterite versus imperfect is possible because somebody else has already thought of the color and we just need to add it to what we have and they can explain it to us. It'll take some time and it'll take some familiarity. We're going to get started now and over time we can get better at it. So let's go in. Preterite, if you're looking at the timeline below, preterite is going to be a dot in the past on the timeline. It's referring to something punctual, precise, and completed. Probably the most useful word for preterite, though, is the word specific. Is it referring to a specific instance or moment or occurrence in time? So the example that I like to use is throwing a marker. Of course, right? You know this. So I throw a marker at Chris's face, right? So if I'm throwing a marker at Chris's face, this is a specific action. The marker is leaving my hand, flying through the air, and hitting Chris in the face. So it's a specific occurrence that is taking place. That's a dot on the timeline. Even if I picked up the marker and I threw it 3 more times, saying I threw the marker at Chris 4 times, right? We're still referring to 4 specific instances in which the marker left my hands and hit Chris in the face. Whereas the opposite, imperfect, would look like this. That means this is something habitual or progressive, or what I used to do. It's not referring to specific instances. It is very inspecific or unspecific. So you can see in the drawing, it's referring to something that happened over and over and over and over and over again, something that you used to do continually. So I could say something like, when we had class, I threw markers at Chris. I'm not referring to a specific instance of a specific time when a marker left my hand and hit him in the face. I'm just saying that that's something that generally happened when we had class. But anywho, so it's something that generally happened or continually happened. I use specific and non-specific happening specifically or specific instance or happening generally or continually over time as my specific understandings of these two concepts. If you think about just specific versus non-specific and then continual or habitual, if you remember those few words, you're going to be able to tell the difference between preterite and imperfect, regardless of the situation. Some people really like to have a whole list of when all the times that they would use preterite and when all the times they would use imperfect. And here it is. If you want to pause the video and write these down in your notes, that will be helpful to you. But I'm just going to quickly explain how the guidelines that we've already learned apply to these things, right? Used for single past events or a specific moment in time. How does that apply to specific? Oh, it uses the word specific, right? Number 2. Use for a list of sequential actions. If preterite is a specific moment or a specific action, you can't list continual actions. You can't list something that you haven't completed. You can't say, I was showering, I was eating, I was playing, No. I showered, then I played, you have to be able to finish something first before you can move on to the next action. 3, use for actions that interrupt the ongoing action. So a lot of time imperfect, they call it the background information in the past, meaning that people use it to set the scene. I was running along the beach. The waves were crashing against the shore. People were suntanning in way too small of bathing suits, right? Little dogs were licking people's faces. None of these was preterite. Those are imperfect. Those were all things that were happening. And as I was running along the beach, then I got hit in the face with a beach ball. Now that is preterite because that is an interrupting action, interrupting everything that was ongoing. And that's finally what had happened. 4, used for verbs referring to the senses. Normally when we feel something, we're referring to a specific instance of, oh, I felt the counter was dirty. That's referring to a specific time of my hand on the counter feeling it. Or I saw somebody at the store. We're referring to a specific moment when I saw them. We're not going to say that I was seeing somebody at the store continually, unless you're like stalking them, right? So not going to be used very often. So you can see the imperfect side. I was kind of talking about those things in progress, or the background information actions in progress. I was running, imperfect. I ran, preterite. Or I ran all the time would also be imperfect because it's not referring to a specific run. Repeated habitual actions, perfect talks, we've already talked about that. Interrupted action, we talked about that on the beach. Telling what the time, weather, or age was. If you think about what time, weather, and age are, time is continually moving, weather is continually there, age is something that we continually are. So those are all going to be described as imperfect things. Also physical and mental states, being angry, being sad, being happy. Those are almost always going to be continual actions. We hardly ever experience happiness in a single specific moment. We normally experience happiness over time. So that's normally going to be described as imperfect. Can you describe it as preterite? Sure. It's just not very common. So we're going to go through some practices here with some practice sentences. I played basketball yesterday. Are we referring to a specific instance? So is it preterite or imperfect? Definitely specific instance. It's saying that yesterday I played basketball. That's a completed action. It would be a dot on the timeline, and now it's over. And the opposite of that would be I played basketball as a kid. Is it talking about a specific game of basketball or occurrence? No, it's not. It's saying that you're playing basketball was a continual, habitual thing that you did as a kid. So that would be imperfect. I was running yesterday. It gives us the word yesterday, which is like a specific timeline, but is the action itself referring to a specific singular, well, not singular, but a specific motion, a specific action taking place? The answer is no. The ing should totally give it away. If some ing adding to something means it's continually happening, right? It's continuous. This is definitely going to be imperfect. Excuse me. So try to think of what the preterite sentence of this would look like. I ran yesterday. That's our preterite. I called Grandma 48 times last year. Is this talking about specific instance or instances? Specific phone call being made, or phone calls being made? Or is it something continual and habitual? This isn't a single dot on the timeline. This is 48 dots on the timeline. It is preterite. It's talking about 48 specific phone calls being made. Those are specific actions taking place. We could just change the words just a little bit. Try to think of how you could make this same sentence imperfect, making it a continual habitual action, but not actually referring to a specific phone call or phone calls. The one I came up with is I called Grandma a lot last year. Now I'm not talking about any specific phone call. I'm just saying that something I did continually in the past, which would be imperfect. I called Grandma yesterday. What would that be? Talking about a specific phone call? Definitely. Okay, I spoke in Spanish with Ramon last night. Perfect, specific conversation? Yeah. Preterite. So, in contrast to that, we might have something like, when I was a child, I didn't speak Spanish. Not speaking Spanish is a continual action, right? That was something that he continually did as a child. So, that's going to be a continuous action, and it's going to be expressed in the imperfect tense. Juan had a dream. This one is very interesting. I want you to try to decide if it's preterite or imperfect. It's referring to a specific moment in time or something continual habitual. The answer is it depends on what type of dream you're talking about. So in English, we could be confused about what type of dream it is. In Spanish, the type of dream would be explained by whether the person used preterite or imperfect. Let me explain. Juan had a dream that one day his 4 little children would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Actually, that wasn't Juan, that was Martin. But having a dream that is a desire or a wish is normally going to be experienced as a continual thing. It's a burning or a desire within you that's continually there, that dream that you have. To be an artist, that is a continual thing. That would be imperfect. Where if you say Juan had a dream last night, you don't even have to add the last night. But if you're referring to a dream that occurred in sleep, that dream is going to be a specific occurrence that happened in your brain during the REM cycle while you were sleeping. It's referring to a specific occurrence. Now I've got an error in my slides here, so it'll take a while to get back down. But this one can be rather imperfect or preterite, depending on what type of dream. So Juan had a CD player. That would definitely be imperfect because possessing something is almost always going to be described as a continual thing. Can you describe it preterite? Sure, but that's not the normal. And come back, Juan had a dream, preterite versus imperfect. This is just a really, really quick intro to preterite versus imperfect, but it starts to give you an idea. We're still working in just English now, but we're going to start to add Spanish endings later. I want you to understand the concepts before we get to the constructions. So if you need to go back and pause any part of this video, feel free to do so. Write some notes, figure out if you understand. If you have any questions, please email me with those questions or Hangouts, chat me so that you can be able to understand some clarifications on the concept. There will definitely be learning how to actually use it in Spanish later, but if you have questions on the concept, please let me know. Okay, we'll see you guys. Ciao.